What time are we supposed to start? Quarter of? Or half past? Am I 4 minutes early or 11 minutes late? 4 minutes early. No, it isn't. I have 1:41. Sure.
GR logger that works while you sleep.
Okay. Let's get rolling here. For those of you out in streaming webland, this is going to be pretty much the same talk I gave before lunch. So you can go do something else. Go work some DX for the next hour or so. Actually, I just saw a note that the FM broadcast band was open with some sporadic E, and guys in New York were listening to FM stations in Mississippi. So there's interesting stuff on the bands. You guys here in the room have to stay here. All you guys out there in webland can go do some VHF stuff. Okay, well, we're going to talk about 10 ways to improve your contest score. And here's the list. Now I'm going to talk about each one of these things, so you can't just take this page out and leave. But these are all things that you can do that will improve your contest score, and if you manage to stick it out until the very end of the talk, I'll be revealing the big secret. So, anyway. The first cluster of improvements that will improve your contest score, or ways to improve your contest score, include tangible things you can do, things that you can spend money on, things that you can actually touch and hold, and that are real things. And they include a new radio, a new amplifier, or an amplifier, new, better, or more antennas, or a new QTH. They will all increase your score, but probably not in the way you think. So, number 10, a new radio. And I don't see Ray Novak here, so I can say that this is the least useful improvement. This is buying a new radio is not really the best way to improve your score.
It's the most fun.
Well, a guy in the audience here says it's the most fun. I'm about to have a grandchild. Could you make a contribution to his or her college fund? Because you obviously have much more money than you know what to do with. So I could use a few bucks here. the reality is that most radios that cost $1,000 or so, even cheaper, from the last 10 years, provide adequate performance and features for most contest applications. If you listen to Rob Sherwood and you read between the lines, he basically says that any radio with an IMD dynamic range of greater than 70 dB is just fine for sideband. Anything better than 80 dB is just fine for CW. If it's worse than that, then maybe a new radio is a good idea. But you don't really need all the big numbers. That's not necessarily going to make your score go up. The benefits of a new radio, yeah, it's more fun. You can brag about how you've got the new radio and those other guys have the old radio. Right, there you go. If it gets you on the air more, then that's a good thing, and it will help your score because you'll be active and you'll enjoy it, and that's good. But will it fundamentally make your score go up? Probably not. Amplifiers, antennas, and location. These are all ways of adding dB. Adding dB will improve your score, period. So now you have to figure out how much will your score go up if you add a dB to your station performance. Then you got to figure out how much it costs, and do you spend your money on dB of amplifier, dB of antenna, or dB of QTH? If the goal is increasing your score, where do you want to spend the money? So we have an interesting test case. Many years ago, K1JX, who a lot of you probably don't know, he was one of the absolute best operators of all time, and back in the late 70s, early 80s, he was right up there in the top of both CQWW phone and CW standings. Brilliant guy, just one of the smartest people I know. We're having lunch, and he said, yeah, you know, it's 6% per dB increase in score. And he just sort of casually tossed that number off. And I said, wait a minute, where'd you get that number? He said, well, I did some analysis, and this was before anyone had spreadsheets and other stuff. And he said, yeah, it's about 6% per dB. So I had that in the back of my mind, and I always wanted to figure out if that was really the number. So as I was researching this particular talk, I found that we had a great test case. N1UR, guy lives in Vermont. Prior to last year, he always operated in the low power category in the DX contest, and he pretty much either won or came in second to K1BX. The two of them were pretty evenly matched, and they just sort of traded back and forth. Ed's got very good antennas. He has the same kind of antennas. He's got stacked monobanders, long boom, 10-meter antenna, a hillside location in W1. And last year, for the first time, he switched to high power. So, did it help his score? Well, first of all, we have to do some verification here. Trust but verify. Was N1UR really running low power all these years? Well, in the 2013 worldwide, if you look at the RBN data, I collected spots for a whole bunch of stations at the DK9AP RBN node. I like using nodes in Germany because Germany is kind of the center of Europe, the center of the population, and that's where you want to be loud, and that's a good place to measure. So here's NN1N's RBN numbers, and if you sort of eyeball an average here, he's at about 24 dB signal to noise ratio on that skimmer. And if you look at the other guys, you know, not all of them got hit a lot, but N1UR shows up pretty consistently. He's in the yellow, and he's mostly about 10 or 12 dB on average down, which is right where he should be. That's on 10 meters. On 15 meters, if you see NN1N over at the arena, tell him he's got to do something about his 15-meter antenna because he's not where he should be. N1UR is still kind of clustered with the other low-power guys. At the peaks, NN1N is louder, but there's some times when he's kind of down there in the mud. So I think he's got to mess around with the angles of his antennas. Maybe he had it pointed the wrong way, but I think this would tell us that N1UR probably is running low power against the high power guys. Buy that? Okay, so if you look at what his performance has been over the last several years, this is N1UR's scores. This is the top high power score for the CQ Worldwide CW. And over here is the percentage, how much of a percentage the high power guys beat N1UR by, and N1UR score as a percentage of the top high power guy. And you see that pretty much for a long time, he ran at about 40% of the score of the top high power guys. And then when he turned on his amplifier for the first time, he was about 80% of the top high power guy. So that tells us he had a big improvement. And you can see how the scores also have improved. So they follow a sunspot cycle, but it was pretty remarkable to me that this curve was as flat as it was. On phone, it's a similar story. On phone, you can see that as the bands opened up in 2011 and we got 10 meters back and could run, the scores went up so that now the top phone scores are just tickling the 10 million point mark. The low power scores were about 4 million, a little bit higher here, and then when N1UR turned on his amplifier, he came up to about 80% of the score. So his increase normalized to the top guy was 73%, which is 6% per dB. Interesting. So does it hold if you compare other low power to high power guys? Well, I compared the top 5 QRP low power guys against the high power guys and calculated the percentage of score increase per dB. Because assuming that the low power guys are running 100 watts, the high power guys are running 1500, that should be, normalized. You should come out at about 6% per dB if this all holds. It didn't. It came out a little bit higher, sort of in the range of 10 to maybe 15% per dB for low power to high power. I think it's, in reality, if the low power guys, if most of them were running similar antennas to the high power guys, that would pick up a couple more dB. So I think that 6% per dB number is probably pretty close to the reality. Working it back down to the QRP guys is almost impossible to do. You can't really get the RBN data to find out how many dB down they are because QRP guys don't call CQ enough. They don't get picked up by the skimmers. In Germany, there were a total of 5 spots for the top 5 QRP guys across all bands last year in the worldwide code. So there's not much data to work from to see what the data looks like. The high power scores are about 1,000% to 1,500% higher than the QRP guys. That's 25 dB. So it's 30% per dB or 40% per dB. So a lot of that, I think, gets eaten up by the antennas because for some perverse reason, there aren't any QRP guys in here, are there? Okay. For some perverse reason, the QRP guys deliberately do things like run low power and have crappy antennas so that so it's no longer a linear thing. There's too many other dB to worry about. Okay, so if you're a low power guy and you want to increase your contest score, put on an amplifier. Now, how much does that cost? Well, you can pick up a used SB220 for about $500. If you want to, if this guy over here who likes to brag about his gear, he's going to go out and he's going to spend 10 grand for an auto tune, auto everything, makes the QSOs and coffee, operates while you sleep, does all those kinds of things. But that's probably overkill. You don't really need that. $2,500 is a pretty good budget number for a used amplifier that's capable of 1,500 watts. You can probably find a new one. The jump from 100 watts to 1,500 is 11.6 dB. Call it 12 dB. The cost per dB, if you use that 2,500 number, it's $200 per dB. If you use the SB220, it's only $43 per dB. With an 80% score improvement, you would expect it's $31 per percent. So you can just dial in these numbers. You can do a lot of this homework yourself. Now, when the exhibit's open, I want you to go over to the Elecraft booth and ask when they're going to have the KPA 1500. And someone at Elecraft will say, you don't really need 1,500 watts. 500 watts is good enough for you. You can say, no. That extra 4.7 dB is going to increase my contest score by 30%.
Doug Doley.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. You heard in the hallways, some guy said. But that's the reality. From 500 watts to 1,500, it's pretty straightforward. It's about 5 dB. It'll increase your score. If you're already running an amplifier, more than 1,500 watts is against the rules. You were here this morning for the first talk. Don't do it. If you're tempted, adding 10 dB from 1,500 to 15,000 is a very expensive proposition. The tubes are expensive. The electrical service improvement to the shack is expensive. The coax, connectors, filters, everything gets complicated. And the damage to your reputation is extraordinarily expensive. Because once a high power guy, always a high power guy, and they will always remind you of it. Oh yeah, that guy, he's in a different category. He's in the high power category. And even if you back down and say, okay, I learned my lesson, I'm running 1500 watts now, nobody will ever believe you. So don't do it. Okay, number 8, antennas. Well, antennas is a very mixed bag of bang for buck. It's not linear for at least on the dollars per dB curve. But there's some interesting things you can look at here. You probably know some of this intuitively, but here's some numbers you can put to it. A quarter wave vertical, 1.77 dBi in free space. Put it over a perfect ground, you get a 5 dBi antenna. How many of you have perfect ground at your place? Oh, gee, I guess not too many. How many have average ground? Okay, so a quarter wave vertical is a 0 dBi antenna over average ground. That's not too impressive. A 40-meter dipole used on 15 meters, so let's talk about 15, I like that band. A 40-meter dipole used on 15 is a 2.8 dBi antenna, it's got gain. An 80-meter dipole used on 15 is 4.7 dBi. Go up to a 3-element beam, that's about 7 dBi. Costs about $500. The boom is pretty manageable size. It only weighs 12 pounds. These are all Force 12 statistics, by the way, just if you're wondering where those numbers came from. You can see that everything you do adds a little bit more. This one's kind of an outlier because this is adding an extra element, but not adding enough boom length to make it work much better. So you spend an extra $150 and you don't really pick up very much, and you'll see that on the next curve. But if you make the boom long enough, you can actually pick up that extra dB. You spend a little more money. And by the time you get up to a 7-element antenna, you've spent some serious money. The boom is 17 meters long. That's a little over 50 feet. That's a pretty big piece of antenna. So let me tell a story about my brother-in-law, K1AR. He does very well in contests and has been doing very well from his location lately using just a dipole. Well, let's look a little bit closer here. There's always more to the story than that. First of all, K1AR is one of the best operators to ever play this game, period. He's terrific. He lives in New Hampshire. He's real loud to Europe. He runs 1500 watts. And that dipole is an 80-meter dipole fed with open wire. And what did I say about 80-meter dipoles used especially on the high bands? They got gain. So it's not like he's using a 15-meter dipole on 15, he's using an 80-meter dipole on 15. So let's put that antenna at 60 feet and compare it to a tri-bander. And it's a little hard to see the green ones here. It's probably easier to see in the book. I think it reproduced a little better. It's only a dB and change down from a tri-bander at the same height. So that's not too bad. He's actually pretty good. Now, if you're sitting out here in Ohio or in the black hole someplace and you're listening to K1AR work guys that you can't hear on 15, and you say, darn, that dipole must be magic. Well, there's nothing magic to it. If you're using a tri-bander at 30 feet or a vertical or a 15-meter dipole, yeah, he's going to hear a lot of stuff that you're not going to hear because he's got, a lot of gain at a good location. He also has the advantage that he sounds real good off the back of his antenna because he has 0 front to back ratio. So if you're sitting in Texas listening to how loud K1AR is with just a dipole, that's because it's as if he had a 3-element tri-bander pointed right at you, running a kilowatt. So that makes him pretty loud. He also has a nice lobe in Brazil, so he gets all these South Africans and South Americans calling him, and Caribbean, and he also can work JAs with the same antenna. So an 80-meter dipole on 15 is not a terribly bad antenna. Go up to 10 meters. What's that? What height is it at? 60 feet? Nothing magic. A couple of tall trees. Put that same antenna, or use that same antenna on 10 meters, and again, compared to a tri-bander, it's not too far down from it in the favored direction. And you've got a whole bunch of other interesting lobes, so you get louder in a whole bunch of other places. A dipole's not a bad antenna, especially if it's really long and you load it up on a higher band. Now, the cost per, the dB per dollar is kind of an interesting curve. You can see down here, this is from the vertical to dipoles and so forth. Here's that little anomaly where a boom that's too short for the number of elements on it doesn't buy you that much. But you can see that this curve sort of flattens out as you get up here, up to $2,500 and more. You know, a 15-meter beam with a 60, 70-foot boom, I'm not sure that's a great antenna for a whole bunch of reasons. Now you can do this modeling for yourself. The modeling tools are available. If you have a starting point of a 40-foot tower with a 3-element tri-bander, pretty modest station, try comparing that to an 80-foot tower with a stack of two 4-element beams, and take a look at the cost, compare the patterns, compare the gain, and you can do your own arithmetic and decide how much your score is going to go up and how much it's going to cost you. So you can do your own math here. It's really not that complicated. Low band improvements are really hard. Frank Donovan gave a talk this morning about 80 and 160 meter, actually 40, 80 and 160, and dBs are expensive there. If you're starting with a baseline of an inverted V at 60 feet, which is a pretty average 40-meter antenna, it's got 1.6 dBi in free space, 6 dB over real ground, but the peak gain is at a very high angle. So it's not a great antenna for working DX unless you get it up higher. If you replace that with a 2-element shorty beam at 60 feet, probably fit on the same tower, you have to put up a tower first of all. That beam's going to cost $1,000, and you got to figure out a way to turn it. It gives 5 or 6 dBi gain in free space, 9 to 10 dB over real ground. And the gain is probably much better than that at lower angles, so it's a much better antenna for DX. So that's the good news. The bad news is that every dB costs you $250. So it's and that's not including the cost of the tower if you don't already have one. So 40 becomes expensive. A vertical or sloper array is a good discount way of trying to get some improvement on low angles for working DX. 80 and 160 gets even more complicated. If you start with an inverted V at 60 feet, almost all your radiation is going straight up. And to work DX, you want your radiation to go that way instead, mostly low. A half slope or vertical array is a better option. Verticals need a lot of radials. An array of verticals will need a phasing box. You can build them or you can buy them. Adding a beverage to receive better is less than $50 and a really terrific investment if you're already transmitting pretty loud on the low bands. I had a guy at the earlier session come by and say, I've got a low beam and I run a kilowatt and I can hear that there are stations calling me and I'm in a crowded neighborhood. What should I do? I said, well, you should probably turn your amplifier off, because if there are guys calling you that you can't hear, you're going to get a reputation of being an alligator and having no ears, and that's not a good reputation. Or you can try some receiving antennas and try and null out your local noise or something so you can hear better. But if there are guys who are calling you that you can't hear, you got to work on your receive capability. A lot of people ignore their feed line, but that's a place where you might be able to pick up some dB depending on what you're using. Let's assume you've got a tri-bander at 60 feet and it's 140 feet from the shack fed with RG8X. Well, by the time you get to 10 meters, RG8X has 4 dB of loss for that length, for 200 feet. 200 feet is not a long coax run, and 4 dB is a huge amount of loss. If you replace that with LMR 400, the loss is 1.6 dB, so you're picking up 2.4 dB for $180, $75 per dB. There's your number. By the way, if you're going to buy LMR 400, please buy it from Times Microwave, because when we were looking for vendors to support us for WRTC, Times Microwave came through and donated a total of 6 miles of coax. Donated 6 miles of coax. So don't buy the LMR 400 made in China, buy the LMR 400 made in Connecticut, and tell them Doug sent you and tell them I said thanks. Now that's equivalent to raising your power by 1.7x. It helps on receive. It's a 24% score increase. If you can find some 3/4 inch cable TV hardline, that's only got a loss of 0.4 of a dB, so now you're picking up 3.6 dB for however much you scrounged a cable TV hardline for. You might get that for free. That's equivalent to raising your power by 2.2x. So improving your feed line is a way, in this case, of picking up about 3.6 dB. If you want to get 3.6 dB additional gain on 10 meters using your antenna, or by changing your antenna, if you start with a 3-element 10-meter Yagi or a tri-bander that has 3 effective elements on 10 on a short boom, going to another 4 dB of gain, or 3.6 dB of gain, requires that you go from 3 elements to 6 elements, go from a 7-foot boom to a 28-foot boom, and it's going to cost you $700 more than what your tri-bander originally cost you. So that's a little bit more. So that's $700 for 4 dB, or that's $200 per dB. So a little bit different price tag. Now, if you already have a 6-element Yagi, that next 3 dB is going to cost you a lot more. Okay, way to improve your score, number 7. Move. I mean, that'll do it. I bumped into K5ZD in the elevator yesterday, and he said, "So what are you talking about tomorrow?" I said, "Well, I'm doing 10 ways to improve your contest score." He said, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." I said, "Yeah, I suppose if I had to sum it up, in my own personal experience, it would be, number 1 is move to Maine, and the other 9 don't count." So, but the reality is that moving will improve your contest score if you're starting with a crummy location. It's complicated and expensive, especially if there are other people in your family, like a wife or kids in school, and moving is not always an option, but it sure can work. Moving to a hilltop or oceanfront versus living in a valley is a big improvement. If you're living in the black hole and you want to do DX contests, if you move to W1, your eyes will be opened, and your scores will go up. On the other hand, if you live in W1 and you want to play in sweepstakes, you've got to be looking at real estate in New Mexico or West Texas or KP4 or something. So location's a big deal, but it's complicated. There is now an option, though, of a virtual move where you stay put, but you use someone else's radio, or maybe your own radio someplace else by using a remote station. It's practical. The remote ham radio guys are out there, and you can rent one of their stations for a contest. You can roll your own. The remote ham radio guys just bought some land in Maine, right on the water. They're going to put up big arrays for 80 and 160. Game on. We have a talk coming up in the contest forum on Saturday about whether remote contesting is ready for prime time. And there are people who are now starting to win contests operating remotely. So that the day is coming where you don't have to move, just a virtual move will do the job. Okay, way to improve your score, number 6, add a second radio. We had a talk about SO2R a while back, and Randy said, please don't try SO2R unless you're really good already at SO1R. And the reason for that is you'll get all tangled up. You'll be transmitting on the wrong radio, listening on the wrong radio. You'll log things on the wrong radio and the wrong band, and everything will just be a total mess. So until you figure you've totally maxed out your abilities with one radio, don't try the second radio. It can be a challenge to do. KL7RA says that SO2R station construction is harder than a multi-multi, which you would think about and say, oh, how can that be? Multi-multis, giant stations. Well, if you think about it, each station is dedicated to a particular band, so you can really gang up on the filtering and optimizing it. In SO2R, each radio has to be able to get to any band, so all that filtering needs to be switchable and move from one station to the other. So it gets really complicated if you're doing it with 2 full power radios and you're going really out for blood. Adding a second radio, the reality only adds about 10% to your QSO total. That's about it. You don't make a lot more contacts on a second radio. It maybe adds 20 or 30% to your score, because you pick up more multipliers. The real benefit, though, to SO2R is you know what's going on in the other bands, and you know if you're on the right band. Now, someone in the earlier session asked, I'm thinking of going to 2 radios, but gee, it looks like an awful lot of work and a lot of expense. And it doesn't have to be. You can use your old radio, set it up with a vertical some distance away from your beam, and you don't even need an amplifier for it. The main reason you'll have it there is to find out whether another band is open. You can call guys barefoot, and most of the time you'll get through after 1 or 2 calls. So a barefoot radio on the second station is just fine for starters. And then you can gradually work up once you figure out how to actually use the thing. Number 5, join a club. When I was a kid, I got a lot out of that. There was a contest club in my region that a bunch of us got into, and as Tim said earlier, when the older guys are willing to share with the younger guys, boy, you can learn a lot. Even if young in these terms means a young contester, not young person. You can learn from the other guys. Find someone who's got about the same skill level as you, exchange rate sheets after the contest, and figure out, how he beat you, and, oh, gee, I missed a 10-meter opening, and, find out stuff like that. There's a song, Forever Young, and one of the lines in it is, may you always do for others and let others do for you. So people are willing to help, let them help you. Take advantage of it. Number 4, go to a multi-op. Most of the multi-op stations are pretty well equipped, probably better than your station. Maybe not, but maybe they've got more experience making it work better. See what it's like to use the big iron. Work on getting yourself invited to a station with a big tower and big beams. See how the other operators play the game. Find whoever the hot operator is, bring a headphone splitter and plug in and just listen. And you'll pick up stuff. You'll find out, gee, this guy doesn't say, please copy with every exchange. And he doesn't acknowledge every exchange with QSL to 5914, 73, and see you later. He just says, thanks, and signs the call sign. Multiply that times a couple thousand, and there's a lot more time to work guys instead of talking. That's a good thing. So you'll learn a lot from the other operators by just listening to them. By looking around and asking questions of the station operator and of the station owner, you can learn the best practices in station design and construction. And you'll find out that the guys who have multi-ops and invite people to come see it are proud of their stations, and they don't make shortcuts in their construction. If you put yourself in the position of being a multi-op station owner, do you want people going around afterwards saying, well, he's got a good location, but geez, the rotators stick all the time and they're not pointed the right way, and you have to bang on the amplifier to get the relay to kick back in, and we had to replace 2 coax connectors because they were Bradley soldered. No one wants to hear that about their station. So the guys who own the multi-ops generally take some pride in it and build the stuff right. And if you look around and ask questions on how they build stuff, you'll learn. And that will improve your score because your station will be better, and you will have had a chance to see the better operators, guys who are better than you operating, and learn from them. And you don't know how much it pains me to say this, but one way to improve your contest score is to use the cluster. That'll add about 20 or 30% to your score if you use it right. If you don't use it right, it won't help you that much. But you're not going to learn anything if the cluster is doing all the work for you. The cluster will distract you, and you can't really believe all the spots. Especially on Sunday, a lot of the spots tend to be of very poor quality. We did a little work on a couple of logs at YCCC meeting a few years ago. There was one guy who let us see his log, and he was very proud of how he had done in the DX contest, but thought he could do better. So I looked at his log, and the first hour on 15 meters, he had 100 contacts. Just click and shoot. Click, call, log. Click, call, log. I looked at the frequencies he was on, and he had a very even distribution of frequencies over that 1 hour. He was all over the whole 15-meter band. He covered every segment of it. I compared it to another log where a guy was running near the bottom of the band and stayed on one frequency and was calling CQ. And he had a little over 100 contacts in the first hour. The second hour, he had 100 contacts. In the third hour, he had 100 contacts, all on the same frequency. Well, the guy who had been pointing and clicking in his second hour only had about 30 or 40 contacts. In the third hour, only had about 30 or 40 contacts. And I said, well, what happened? He said, I don't know. There weren't any new guys being spotted. I worked all the guys that were CQing, and that's exactly what happened. In a given contest weekend, on a given band, there's only 100 guys calling CQ. If you just go through and you click the spots and you work those 100 guys, that's it. You're done. Whereas the guy who was CQing had all the guys that were looking for him, calling him, and then later when the band started to go out, then maybe he tuned around the band looking for stuff. You also lose a lot of the situational awareness of all you're doing is clicking on cluster spots. If you're actually listening to the band and tuning through it looking for multipliers, as you tune through it, you'll hear it and you say, oh, there's the guy with the gravelly voice. I know I've worked him. I don't know what his call is, but I remember working the guy that sounded like that. And a little further up, you say, oh yeah, there's the YL that I heard. I've already worked her. A little further up, I don't remember anyone being above her. There's another signal here. That must be a new one. Let me listen to that one and work it. You don't get that if you're just blindly clicking on spots. You have no idea what's happening on the band, and you run out of guys to work. So learning to operate on your own is a much better way of improving your skills in the long term. If you just want to get a short-term kick, if you want to get that, that short-term buzz by drinking the energy drink and getting a 4-hour kick, all right, fine. Go ahead and click them. But be very, very, very careful. You can make your score go down by trusting the spots on the screen. These are screenshots from the ARL-DX CW contest. If you look right here on this frequency, if you just click those spots, you will log M6M, TM6G, TM6M, and TM6MTM. How many of those calls are right, and which one? One that we've already worked. So why would you spend any time there? Well, a lot of guys go ahead and just click them, send the call. I already know this is M6M because it says it right there on the screen. I don't have to listen to them. And you get a busted call, you lose that contact plus the penalty, and your score just went down. Over here, we've got a great collection. On this one frequency here, we have both J2WE, Djibouti, a double multiplier. He's on the same frequency as SJ2W. I wish that guy would stop transmitting so I could work the J2. It's obviously a busted spot from a skimmer. Over here we've got YU7KW, YU7TTI, and YU7KWE all on the same channel. Okay, work them all and watch your score go down. Here we've got RO4P, RJ4P, and RP4P all sharing the same channel, except it's all the same guy. So just click them, work them, and if you worked everything on this screen here, you would have a negative score. You get the point, you can't trust what's on the screen. Okay, the second way to improve your score, or number 2 way, is go to Dayton, come to CTU, meet people, learn from the pros. You heard some of it from Tim just a little bit ago. Ask questions. Pay attention to conversations that you hear. If you're walking down the hall and you hear a guy saying, well, I just tried this new antenna on 40 and it's not working out too well. Stop. Listen. What 40 meter antenna didn't work too well? Why? What was the problem? What are you going to do about it? Now you've just learned something that you won't find in a book anywhere. You'll only find it by being there. And pay attention. If you start hearing people talking about funny openings that they've been getting the way propagation is now, pay attention. You might learn a trick or two from these guys. They're all here. You can learn from them. But the number 1 way to improve your contest score, this is it. This is the big secret. There's no secret. The main thing, it's mostly about getting on the air a lot. You know, don't just turn the radio on 4 times a year, 6 times a year. Get on the air a lot. You know, besides the weekends, during the weekdays, there's actually a few guys that get on the air, and you can tune around, and a lot of them are just tuning around waiting for someone to call CQ. So if you call CQ, guys will show up. We found that with the W1AW operations last year. There's a whole bunch of guys during the week that are just tuning around looking for something interesting to work. You might be the interesting thing for them, so get on and call CQ. If you're going to operate from home a lot, you should learn your station capability for each of the bands. My station in New Hampshire was modest. It was okay. I won a couple of contests from there. But I got to know my station capabilities really well. I knew that KC1XX, who was about half an hour away from me, I knew that I had to wait till he had a really good rate going on 15 or 10 before I should go, because he was a lot louder than me. And if I went there, I'd be leaving a band where I had a good rate and going to a band that wasn't quite open for my station. I learned that if I listened on 160 and I heard 4Z4DX calling CQ, if he was S2 or S3, I couldn't work him. If he got up to S5 or S6, now I can work him, 1 call every time. So you need to learn your station's capabilities, because otherwise you'll get very frustrated trying to work guys that you really don't have a chance of working and wasting a lot of time. I don't work a lot of DX. I'm not really a DXer, but I love it when DXpeditions get on because it gives you a chance to practice your timing and pileups, tuning around, finding out where people are working, how to tail end the guys that are getting through. That's the kind of stuff. You got to listen, and listen some more. When I get on in the middle of the week or on weekends when there's no contest, I listen a lot. And I don't necessarily transmit very much, but I listen a lot. And I have guys call me up and say, hey, everything okay with you? I haven't heard you on very much. Well, I've heard you. I've been listening to you. I just haven't transmitted. I've been listening a lot. Another thing you can do is if there's some opportunity to run QSO parties, some throwaway contest where you're not going to really put in a lot of time, get on and run, guys. Get a pile up, get some stuff coming in. What that will help you with is getting familiar with call signs, burning those call signs into your brain's super check partial. It'll give you a feeling for where certain where countries are in certain call sign assignments. You'll know that there are a lot of SQ call signs showing up now. It's not just SPs in Poland, there's a lot of SQs. There are a lot of LWs in Argentina. You'll know that that's a valid prefix and so forth. You know that in the fourth call area, they're up to the KM4s now, and that's a valid prefix. You get a sense for what call signs make sense and what don't. One thing that someone pointed out to me earlier was that one of the things I didn't mention is before a contest, download the list of DXpeditions that are going to be on, because a lot of times they're using funny call signs, or the WPX contest, they'll use a prefix you haven't heard before. And it'll throw you if you haven't heard a prefix like that before, but if you've looked at it and you've seen it on a list, your brain will say, okay, that's a good call sign. 5D5A is a good call. And it's not AD5D or whatever. You get to know what's real and what's not. N6AA gives a great talk about the vocabulary of call signs and how you develop it over time. It's the same as any vocabulary. You start with just a few words, and other things that are complicated, you can't really tell if it's a word or just a random combination of letters and numbers. But as you get more and more comfortable, as you expand your vocabulary of call signs, it makes it a lot easier when you hear part of a call sign, then and you miss the rest of it. Well, you can probably fill in the blanks or make a pretty good educated guess, even if it doesn't come up on the super check partial screen. And that's really important. That's something that comes with experience. The big myth that runs around from time to time is, well, that guy's a super operator. He's just a natural. He's really, really good. He was born that way, and I could just never be as good as that guy because somehow he's genetically better. The I am what I am, and that's all what I am. Well, I don't buy that. The scouting report on Larry Bird was that he can't run and can't jump. Well, that's true. In fact, in Boston, there's a standing joke that the bronze statue of Larry Bird down at Faneuil Hall has exactly the same vertical leap as the real Larry Bird. He can't shoot as well. Bird can definitely shoot and pass. When Fred Astaire, for those of you who remember Fred Astaire, the screen test for RKO said can't sing, can't act, balding, can dance a little. Is this our next movie star? Well, he went on to have a pretty good career in film. There's a book called Outliers, written by a guy named Malcolm Gladwell. Anybody here read that book? Yep, there's a few of you. It's an interesting book. Some of the stuff in there is questionable, but he was responsible for a bunch of academic research that got completely misinterpreted in the popular press. This in particular. There's a researcher named K. Anders Ericsson in Florida who's been researching individuals at elite levels of performance, the best of the best of the best. And what he discovered was that 10,000 hours is required to get to the top level. And he cites the Beatles, who played 5-hour-long sets or 6-hour-long sets. They played 1,200 live performances in Hamburg. And over that amount of time and that much practice, they got really, really good at playing together. Bill Gates had access to a computer at age 13 when no one else did, so he started young and so forth. And the theorem is that 10,000 hours of deliberate practice is required for mastery. And there's an interesting quote in the original paper that says, deliberate practice is not always enjoyable. And if you think about it, think about a piano player. They spend hours and hours and hours playing the scales, over and over and over again. It ain't fun. It's not much. It's not a catchy tune. You can't dance to it. But the muscle memory builds up. The skill of typing, of playing the keys comes up. The top contest operators really don't have bigger ears. They don't have better hearing. They don't have springier fingers to work the paddle. None of that's true. And this is a quote from one of Ericsson's more recent papers. They talk about giftedness research, and they have long debated whether there's empirical evidence to support a distinction between giftedness and attained level of achievement. And with the exception of fixed genetic factors determining body size and height, they were unable to find evidence for innate constraints to the attainment of elite achievement for healthy individuals, which basically means if you got hearing and you got fingers, you can become a CW contester, and with enough practice, you can get pretty good at it. That's what that boils down to. There are a few more factors that have come up from recent research. If you start younger, all other factors being equal, if you started younger, they were the higher achievers at the elite level, and probably related to the development of working memory capacity, which is the ability to remember a set of objects when engaged in another task. That's something that gets wired in your brain earlier in life than later in life. There's another school of thought that says there's another factor of what's been termed grit, which is the unique blend of IQ and EI. You're familiar with EI, emotional intelligence? That's not the book learn, and that's the street smarts side, understanding how other people interact and so forth. But grit is that blend of IQ and EI that results in persistence, the fact that you continue to work at it. It's the desire and passion to get better, driving the willingness to spend so many hours practicing a skill. If you want it bad enough, you'll put the work in. That's another way of looking at it. However, where that whole 10,000 hour rule got mutilated in the popular press is it started with, if you want to be the world's best chess player, the world's most virtuoso violin player, the world's best computer programmer, you need 10,000 hours of practice. How many think they're going to be the world's best contester? Anybody out here? There's a guy who did an interesting TED Talk on this. If you're not familiar with the TED Talks, I encourage you to Google them. They're on a million different subjects, and they're mostly really good speakers, and most of them are fascinating. Google this guy, Josh Kaufman. He gave a talk that basically said you can get pretty good in 20 hours, not 10,000 hours. I mean, 10,000 hours is a lot of time. You normally work 40 hours a week. That's 2,000 hours a year. So that's 5 years of full-time work to get good at something. That sounds like a lot. Well, to be the best in the world, that's about right. But you can get pretty good in 20 hours. And what he said was, first of all, take the skill that you're looking for, break it down into smaller parts, learn it well enough to be able to self-correct your mistakes, remove the barriers to practice, set aside the time to do it, and put in a real full 20 hours. The first few hours are going to be very frustrating when you're learning something new because you really are not very good at it. But get past that and keep going, and it'll get better and it'll get easier. And the example that he used, and it's great, he said, I always wanted to play a musical instrument, and now I have enough time to do it, and I'd like to learn something, so I started thinking about what instrument to play. So I looked at the guitar, and it's this really long wooden thing with all these fret things on it and 6 strings, and geez, that looks pretty complicated. I don't think I'll do that. Maybe piano. Geez, there's 88 keys on this thing. Man, that's a lot. Maybe I'll try the ukulele. The neck's only that long. There's only 4 strings. Looks like it's manageable. So he picked up a book on how to play the ukulele and bought a ukulele. He looked at the book, and the book said, okay, here are the 300 different chords you can play on a ukulele. And he said, 300 chords? Man, that'll take forever. So he started talking to some musicians, and they said, you can play most songs that you know with 4 chords. That's interesting. Now, I have to digress a little bit. I heard a joke. Kid starts taking bass lessons. Teacher comes to the house and says, okay, this week I'm going to teach you the chord C. Put your fingers here, go like that. And kid plays it a little bit and he says, okay, I'm going to come back next week. I want you to practice C every day until I come back. Okay. Comes back the next week, says, let me hear you play C. Play C, perfect. He says, okay, this week I'm going to teach you the chord G. Put your fingers here, like this, hit it. Okay, that's pretty good. Practice that and C, practice those next week. So he comes back the next week and the teacher says, let me hear the C. Oh, that's good. Let me hear the G. Oh, that's good. Okay, now today I'm going to teach you E, and I want you to practice that for the next week. He said, and the kid says, I can't make next week's lesson. I got a gig. Anyway, Kaufman said, I learned that 4 chords would be enough to be able to play most songs that anybody knows on the ukulele across a lot of different genres. And if you go to his TED Talk, he picks up his ukulele in front of an audience of 500 people and plays a medley of songs from classical to pop to rap to oldies, all kinds of stuff, and he sings along with it. And he says, okay, in the 5 minutes that I've just played, I've completed 20 hours of practice. Not bad. So you can do it. So contesting is a personal endeavor. This is the hobby that you chose to do. Some of us do it to compete. We want to build a station. We want to continually improve the station. We want to operate a lot. We want to get better. Some of us do it just for fun. It's something to do on the weekends or at night and get on and play a little bit. Pick up a few new countries here and there because I'm more interested in DXCC, and I'll take what I can get for a score. But this is what I want to get out of it. Some people do it for both because most games are more fun when you develop a higher level of skill. It's more fun to do it when you're actually pretty good. If you're playing basketball and you're trying to shoot free throws and you're only getting 1 out of 10 in the basket, boy, that's kind of frustrating. And if you just don't have the physical balance and so forth to be able to get better, you can practice. But if you're just not very good at it, you're going to walk away and find something else to do. A game like radio contesting is something that does respond to a lot of practice. So the more you practice, the better you get. The more fun you have. But whatever your goal is in contesting, keep doing it, and I hope you have fun. Thanks. So we're supposed to be over at what? Probably 2:45? 2:40. It's what time now? 2:35. So we have a couple of minutes for questions. So if there are any questions you want to fire at me, this is your big chance. Who's the LMR 400 company? Times Microwave. TIMES Microwave. Yeah. Excuse me, you guys in the front, could you get the guy in the back here? Go ahead. Very good point. The comment is one of the things that he's doing is to bring some of the new operators along is the multi-single low power category. I think that's a terrific category because there are a lot of guys that don't have amplifiers, but they want to do a multi-op so that a few guys can share the operating. If you have big antennas or good antennas and a good location, you can have a lot of fun with low power, and multi-single is a great category. It's the most popular category of all the multi-ops, and it's just a lot of fun. I like the CQ Worldwide flavor better than the ARL flavor, but that's my own personal preference. But yeah, that's a great comment. Yeah. Anybody else? No? Really? Okay. Thank you very much.